Correspondent Holly Hudson. A very good morning to you, Holly. I guess by this time, this afternoon, the UK will be having a new Prime Minister. What's the sentiment on the ground in the UK?
Yes, so by this afternoon, Boris Johnson will walk into number 10. He has his big meeting with later after Theresa May's last Prime Minister. He said not to attend that as he doesn't want to overshadow what will be her chance to define her legacy, try and find than Brexit and hand over to Boris Johnson, the official handover which takes place later today. We'll hear a very short speech from Theresa May and then we'll hear from Boris Johnson. Yesterday was all about sort of putting his arms around the party who supported him and got him here, got him into this position. He's won the Conservative Party leader contest, which makes him the British Prime Minister. There's quite a lot of anger about that process itself, the fact that it is only Conservative Party members who have voted for him. The opposition leader, Jeremy Corbyn, even saying that Boris Johnson won just less than 100,000 votes of Conservative Party members. That equates to less than a 0.25% of the population. So a lot of people feeling that he doesn't actually have the mandate to push through with his Brexit plans, become Prime Minister. But today he will try and once again call himself the dude, as he did yesterday, which is deliver, unite, defeat and energise the country. And the unify is very key there, as he really does have his work cut out. It's going to be a tall order to unify his party, parliament and country, which are all extremely polarised.
When it was announced yesterday that he was victorious, the leaders of the party bringing him on stage made a plea to the room to be nicer to Boris than they had been to Theresa. Is there a sentiment that people were just unnecessarily hard on Theresa May?
Yes, that was quite an unusual thing for the Conservative Party to say and to state. I mean, that sort of plea is slightly unprecedented. I think Theresa May's 3-year premiership has been embittered and embattled by, and of course defined by Brexit. The withdrawal agreement that she agreed was voted down 3 times by MPs. And there was a lot of talk throughout her premiership about the language that was used by MPs. There was a lot of the knives are out for her, knives in her back. She obviously ended up having to resign. So I think the sort of sentiment was that we need to all be a bit nicer to each other to try and get this deal over the line. Over 3 years of Theresa May's premiership, look at how we all fought each other. It didn't, again, talk of unification. Conservative Party, they feel that's the only way that they are going to make good, or Boris Johnson at least will make good on his only campaign pledge, really, that do or die will leave the EU by the 31st of October, the current deadline.
Yeah. And just a last one about Theresa May. I know the biggest conversation right now is Brexit, but there's always that conversation about female leadership. Theresa May was the second Prime Minister for the UK. What is the conversation about women leadership in the UK, of course, taking into consideration how Theresa May's leadership unfolded?
Yes, well, Theresa May, as you say, was only the second female Prime Minister here. And she actually, when she gave her resignation speech, I'm not sure if you remember, she broke down in tears during that speech. But she said she was extremely proud of that fact. And it remains to be seen how many women will actually make up Boris Johnson's cabinet. That's what all eyes are on today, exactly how much of a gender balance he will pursue with regards to that. And when he was London Mayor, he did have a lot of women working in his team. So there is talk that he will reflect that. It's very important here in the UK that he does so. And obviously all eyes are on his cabinet as well, not least because of Brexit and who the ministers will be, as they will shape the future relationship with the European Union.
He said yesterday that he was looking to have a diverse cabinet. What did he mean?
When he says diverse cabinet, he's looking again at gender balance. He's looking at ethnic minorities. Priti Patel, the former International Development Secretary, she's well placed to have a position in his cabinet. But interestingly as well, we'll have to see where he puts Jeremy Hunt, his rival in the Conservative Leadership Party contest. Rumours today that he's offered him Defence Secretary. Of course, Jeremy Hunt is the current Foreign Secretary and is apparently standing his ground and refusing to accept any less than the highest positions in office, which here in the UK are considered Foreign Secretary and Home Secretary. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. We're expecting to see a lot of resignations today from the current cabinet members, including the Chancellor, Philip Hammond. We've already seen some in protest at Boris Johnson before he even got the keys to number 10. So there's expected to be a lot more littered around today, jumping before they're pushed, shall we say.
Just try to unpack that dude approach for us. He has promised that he will deliver Brexit, but he has also warned that there might be job losses. What can Britons expect?
Yes, his dude speech, or the line in his speech where he called himself sort of a self-styled dude, saying that the acronym that he was using for his campaign was Deliver, Unite and Defeat. And someone pointed out to him that that spelled dud, which he realised wasn't necessarily the best campaign slogan. So he added the E. An E for energise is how he put it. And there was a lot of talk in his acceptance speech about how he wants to energise the country. There's a new spirit. We're a sleeping giant rising up. And that is what he's trying to incite. He believes that if he can do that, then, of course, Britain will get Brexit done and he will be able to unify the country. But he is a very divisive figure. There's no denying at all about Boris Johnson. He is what we say Marmite in this country. You either love him or you hate him. And that is generally the feeling amongst Britons here today.
So all excitement about the dude, but in reality, breaking away from the European Union is not going to be an easy task for the UK. What does the future look like for this country, separate from the EU?
We've had a lot of bleak outlooks, economic outlooks in the last week even, with this leadership contest ongoing, of exactly how that would play out for the UK, in particular with regards to no deal. Now, we know Boris Johnson's central pledge of this campaign has been that do or die, we will leave by the 31st of October with or without a deal. He wants to renegotiate with the EU, but of course they still support May's deal. Even Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator, tweeting yesterday that he's looking forward to working with Johnson and ratifying the current deal. So that signifies where they're at. The political declaration is up for negotiation. Now, that's not legally binding, but it sort of sets out the path, shall we say, of exactly the future relationship between the EU and the UK. That's something Boris Johnson said he could well change. But of course, the fact that he's willing to take us out with a deal is causing huge divisions in his Conservative Party. He already inherited a very slim majority from Theresa May, which essentially is a similar problem to what she had. How is he going to get a deal through Parliament with such a slim majority? Now, there is, of course, the option of calling an early general election. Boris Johnson's hinted he doesn't want to do that, of course, within the first 100 days, essentially, of his premiership. But it may well be one of the only ways that he can force through his Brexit plans.
How have international partners, allies and foes responded to the announcement that Boris Johnson will this afternoon become the next Prime Minister of the UK?
Well, talking about the EU's reaction, Boris Johnson's had a very glowing response from his friend Donald Trump over in the US, who we already know really looked upon Boris Johnson favourably when Donald Trump came over here in June. He controversially waded into the leadership contest and endorsed Boris Johnson, essentially calling him a very talented guy, saying he would get Brexit done. So he does have at least Donald Trump's support in thinking that he can work out Brexit. And Donald Trump again yesterday tweeting congratulations, he's a great guy, and even saying again that he feels he will get the work done, and comparing Boris Johnson to Britain's Trump. Apparently that's what Donald Trump thinks that people here in Britain refer to him as. But that endorsement by Donald Trump, of course, has again, been very divisive here in the UK. Some believe that the fact that he has endorsed Boris Johnson signifies what kind of Prime Minister he will be, those comparisons being drawn. But of course, the relationship with the UK, the special relationship between the US and the UK is very important here. So Boris Johnson diplomatically will have to tread very carefully in that respect.
So as Boris Johnson comes in, the European Union has also just recently changed leadership. So is this going to make conversations difficult, or is there going to just be a smooth handover and progression?
Well, yes, Ursula von der Leyen becoming the new EU Commission President, you would assume that obviously a new face in number 10 and a new face at the head of the European Commission might mean new opportunities for Brexit. But Ursula von der Leyen doesn't actually take up her post officially until the 1st of November from Jean-Claude Juncker. So for the next few months, it will be down to the old faces, Donald Tusk, Michel Barnier and Jean-Claude Juncker, who will meet with Boris Johnson to try and agree a new deal, as Boris Johnson says. So there is going to be a real tug of war there between those players. But it's likely that there's been a lot of talk about sort of the choreography of where Boris Johnson will go now, exactly when he will go to Brussels and talk with those leaders, whether he will go to Paris, whether he'll go to Ireland to try and speak to the Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar. We know that, of course, that the controversial Northern Irish backstop has been a real sticking point with regards to those negotiations. And Boris Johnson set a number of red lines with regards to how far he's willing to go with that backstop. That's the sort of insurance policy to make sure there's no hard border between Ireland in the EU and Northern Ireland in the UK. So that is no doubt going to cause yet again some friction there between the EU and the UK. But the first 100 days of Boris Johnson's premiership will be crucial in figuring out exactly whether he will be able to deliver on these promises, his central promise of the fact that we will leave the EU by the 31st of October. And if he doesn't, then these promises that have sort of got him into number 10 may well be the ones that force him out.
Yeah. And just to use your words there, choreography, what is up next in terms of the changeover program? We know we've been told that Ms. Theresa May, after addressing Parliament, will then go to the Queen. What are the processes leading up to the inauguration of Boris? Is it this afternoon? Is it at a later date?
No, so the official handover, he's obviously been announced as the new Prime Minister, a sentence that many here in the UK actually would probably never have believed would have happened or been uttered a few years ago, let alone a few months ago. But he will step into number 10 today. He will get the keys from Theresa May. Officially what will happen is there will be Prime Minister's questions around midday here, UK time. Then Theresa May will head to the Queen to offer her resignation before Boris Johnson sort of swaps in and asks her to officially form a government. Then we will hear from him on the steps of number 10, his sort of first speech as Britain's Prime Minister, where he will set out his plans in terms of Brexit. His domestic agenda, of course, is still very important. And with regards to international relations, too, of course, there are escalating tensions at the moment between Britain and Iran, which can't be ignored either. So he's got a very daunting in-tray, Boris Johnson. No honeymoon period for him whatsoever. And we'll also hear later as well, which all eyes are on, who will make up his cabinet.
Holly, what's the sentiment amongst opposition parties, the Labour Party and other smaller parties?
Jeremy Corbyn did tweet yesterday that he doesn't have the mandate to deliver Brexit because he only had 92,000 votes of the Conservative Party. This was a contest between Conservative Party MPs, Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt, and it was only up to Conservative Party members to vote on them, and they only make up 160,000, less than 0.25% of the population. That has really angered a lot of people, in particular the opposition party, Labour, who say it just doesn't give Boris Johnson the mandate to deliver in such a crucial, critical political time as we're having here in the UK. And he has also signified that at any moment he could surprise Boris Johnson with a vote of no confidence, which would essentially try and bring the government down. But he's not exactly signalled when he'd be willing to do that, just that he could at any moment. So already a threat from the opposition party, and definitely if Boris Johnson does try to push through with no deal later on in the next few months, then that vote of no confidence will no doubt be called by the opposition party, and we could even see MPs in the Conservative Party joining them in a sort of cross-party defection to vote down their own government if Boris Johnson does try and push through with no deal. That's definitely a potential threat there.
Now, Holly, just to wrap up, we know that relations between South Africa and the UK are like a seesaw game, but we've seen Theresa May being very cordial towards the current administration in South Africa. Do we know the way forward in terms of this specific relationship?
Yes, definitely. Boris Johnson will be very keen, I'm sure, to maintain. Obviously, we saw Theresa May visit Africa last year, and the relationship with South Africa and African countries will be extremely important now, given the current situation with the UK leaving the EU. So Boris Johnson will no doubt make sure that he puts somebody in the Foreign Secretary role that will encourage that relationship that Theresa May nurtured herself. So no doubt see Boris Johnson or his Foreign Secretary making trips to Africa in the next coming months or coming year to nurture that relationship, particularly going forward with regards to trade, I'm sure, as well. With leaving the EU, the United Kingdom needs to maintain as many allies as it can around the world.
Thank you so much for that update. Do we know exactly what time, UK time, that Mr. Boris Johnson will officially become the PM?
He will step into Downing Street at around 4 p.m. this afternoon. So, yeah, we'll all be keeping our eyes very much peeled on that.
Holly, thank you so much for that update. Holly Hudson is our UK-based correspondent.